Are we in a bubble right now? We're recording this in October of 2025, and we're seeing what might be a fluky coincidence. We want to share with you the top 8 names that make up the NASDAQ 100 index are stacked by market capitalization are also the same 8 names stacked by market capitalization in the S&P 500. And as far as we can tell, we haven't seen this before. The top 8 names are stacked here by market capitalization. Now, market capitalization is the number of shares that a company has times their current market price. And you can see the number one name right now is Nvidia, followed by Microsoft and then Apple. Number 4 is Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google. Number 5 is Amazon. Number 6 is Meta, which is the parent company for Facebook, followed by Broadcom and Tesla. What we'd like to point out to you is take a look at the percentages as they're all added up. You can see that in the S&P 500, these top 8 names make up 37% of the S&P 500. That's large, but not unprecedented. Take a look at the NASDAQ 100 list. You can see that the top 8 names make up 69% of the index. Now, NASDAQ 100 index is just 100 names, S&P 500, 500 different companies. It's not unusual to see 65, 70% of the NASDAQ 100 being dominated by a top 5, top 8, top 10 list. A lot of this gets concentrated at the top end of the list. And as I had mentioned, it's not unusual. We've seen other periods in the past where the top 5, top 8, top 10 names in the S&P 500 also make up a large percentage of stocks. And we want to walk through some examples right now. Before we get to that, I want to address the question, are we in a bubble right now? I don't think so, but I don't know how this is going to age over time. What I can say is that we are certainly in a bull market for talking about bubbles right now. Everywhere you turn in the financial media, all they talk about is the potential for a stock market bubble. Don't know how this is going to work out. Really, the only time you can identify a bubble is by looking back at history. So when we talk about history, it's important to know that the S&P 500, the basket of 500 companies, wasn't created until 1957. Prior to 1957, we had the Dow Jones Industrial Average to talk about. But even before that, before the Dow Jones was created, that was 1896, they had the Dow Jones Transportation Index. These were all created by Charles Dow. Dow created the transport index in 1884. In fact, it was originally called the Dow Jones Railroad Average because it was 11 railroad companies. When the Dow Jones Industrial Average was created in 1896, as you can guess, it was dominated by the rails. And that continued for about 25 years until we started seeing automobile companies start to get added to the list. When you fast forward to the creation of the S&P 500 index in 1957, industrials, auto companies, chemical companies, manufacturing companies, they were 40% of the S&P 500 from its creation in 1957 for a period of about 20 years into the mid 1970s. And that's when you saw energy companies, oil stocks, really become the dominant sector in the S&P 500. From the mid 90s up through 2008, it was the banks that dominated. The financial companies dominated the S&P 500. They made up a little more than 25% of the S&P 500 in 2007. We also saw a brief period of time where the dot-coms really ran the tape for a while until they imploded in March of 2000. And so one area of the economy can influence the index or the basket for many, many years, in fact, decades even. It does not immediately mean that we're in a bubble or that some bubble is going to imminently pop. I do want to share something also very interesting here when we're talking about the S&P 500. Go back to the year 2000. The number 7 name on the S&P 500 at the time by market capitalization was a company called Enron. We don't hear too much about Enron these days. That's because they went bankrupt in 2001. That's right. The 7th largest company in the S&P 500 went from number 7 to gone in a very, very short period of time. kind of unusual to see them fall as fast as they did. It kind of reminds me of the Hemingway quote, "How did you go bankrupt? First, very slowly, then all at once." But here's a fun fact. November 29, 2001, they replaced them out of the S&P 500. So Enron was out. They were replaced by a company called Nvidia, which is now the #1 company by market capitalization in the S&P 500 today.